So let's go ahead and take a look at the OnePlus 8 Pro and see how this specific phone holds up in 2023. Now, I remember in 2020, when this phone first came out, it was a very interesting phone from OnePlus, and I was very happy with it. I think this was a very good approach from OnePlus at the time, especially when they went and came from their OnePlus 7 Pro the year before, which was a killer phone. I think they did a tremendous job with the OnePlus 7 Pro. Even the 7T Pro was a pretty decent upgrade. With the OnePlus 8 Pro, this was also a pretty big, it wasn't like a ginormous upgrade by any means, but it was a good update for sure. It definitely wasn't on par with the OnePlus 7 Pro, but I still look at this phone and I still think it has a lot of power. I still think it's very relevant. So let's go and see how this phone holds up. If you want to pick up this phone or some other phones I would recommend this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the front of the OnePlus 8 Pro, you can see that we do have the standard, it's a big display. It's a 6.78-inch fluid AMOLED display. It was a 1440p panel, and it was a 120Hz display as well. Now, I remember getting the OnePlus 8 Pro, and I remember taking it out of the box and feeling it in the hand, and it was such a nice feeling phone. It felt very good. The display was a very good display. But if you remember, this came off right after the OnePlus or the Samsung Galaxy S20s of that year. Not right after, but it was around the same time within like a 2-month, period. And I definitely tell you the S20s, all of them had amazing panels. So this really wasn't the best panel of that year, but this was a very good panel of that time. And I think that was a very interesting thing that they actually did during this moment, was to kind of, bring that hole punch display back, to, basically removing that, camera system on the top, which I think was a smart move. And, essentially giving us the hole punch display on the top left, almost matching in line with something like the Galaxy S10, although the S10's hole punch display was on the right side instead of the left here. Now you had the fingerprint sensor in the display here too, which was really nice. And overall, the front of this phone, it still holds up very well. The only thing that's missing nowadays probably on this phone is like the centered hole punch display. But regardless, I still like the way this phone looks, and it looks very good for sure. Now you have a USB-C port on the bottom, which is great. Very kind of thinner looking frame because of the curved glass on the front and the back. Kind of give it this more like, seamless experience, more like it blending in on the sides, which is actually a nice touch. And on the back, we have our frosted glass back. Now again, this is a very good thing OnePlus did here. I think this was the first time they brought back the frosted glass back on a lot of their phones. They changed up the design so much on their phones sometimes, so some of the phones had a frosted glass back, some of them didn't. I think the OnePlus 7 did have it, which was really nice, and this phone ended up having it as well. So, in my opinion, this is my favorite way of OnePlus making their phones, is the frosted glass back. Any phone manufacturer that does it, it just feels so good in the hand. Now you do have this camera setup, which we'll talk about in a second. We have wireless charging. We have reverse wireless charging too, which is really nice. And that was kind of it. You had IP certification on this phone as well, which is a big deal for OnePlus because sometimes they bring it on their phone, sometimes they don't. And, no expandable storage, no headphone jack, nothing like that. But it's still a very good phone. And for a 2020 device, I still think it's holding up fairly well in terms of the body standpoint. So in terms of that, it kind of gets a thumbs up from me. Now moving on to that camera side of things, like I mentioned, this phone had a very interesting type of camera layout. So it had a 48 megapixel wide-angle lens, an 8 megapixel telephoto lens, a 48 megapixel ultra-wide camera, and then a 5 megapixel color filter camera. Now there's a few cameras on this phone that don't really matter a lot. I think the telephoto lens isn't really that big of a deal, and that color filter camera definitely wasn't that big of a deal at all. So really we are having that triple camera setup, the wide telephoto ultra-wide camera, but the main focus I think was that wide and the ultra-wide camera. On the front, we do have a 16 megapixel wide-angle lens, which has been the same on all their OnePlus phones for many generations. I was surprised they still at this point did not give us 4K at 60 on the front. I think the OnePlus 11 still doesn't have that type of capability, which is insane, but it's just one of those things. It's such a, the 2019 iPhone 11 had that type of capability. I feel like OnePlus should have given us it at least in 2020 on their main flagship phone, but what are you gonna do? We can't go back in time and change anything. Now, I remember using this camera then, really, it was a good camera, but I feel like it hasn't aged that well, especially with the new variations of OxygenOS. It hasn't really been that great of an experience from OnePlus, and even with the OnePlus 11 that just came out, that camera wasn't even that great either, to be honest, which was kind of surprising to me. So when it comes down to it, I definitely do think that a phone like this, the camera quality and everything like that, I feel like OnePlus could have done a better job here. It's definitely not that great of a camera, and that's kind of where we are at nowadays. So in terms of that, that kind of covers it up there. Now, from the software and the longevity portion, with something like the OnePlus 8 Pro, this phone is pretty much going to be lasting, I would probably say, maybe one more generation of software. Maybe it'll end now, because of its, way OnePlus has been kind of changing Auction OS to Color OS and matching the two. I mean, I remember using this phone when it first came out, and I think this phone, or maybe the OnePlus 9, were one of the last ones to have like full-on, almost stock Android, and man, they have changed things drastically. Whenever I boot up my, when I did boot up my OnePlus 11, I was shocked by the way, OnePlus kind of changed the whole entire software. I mean, it was such a beautiful version of software before, and now we're pretty much stuck in this weird situation where like it's really not that great of a version of software. It's kind of buggy. There's so many glitches. My battery life is not great on my OnePlus 11, and the performance, like it's not really that great, to be honest, for what you're getting. With the OnePlus 8 Pro, I would say this was still a moment where Auction OS was still on top. And even at that moment, it was still my favorite version of software as of that point. So it's kind of sad to see where they've gone now. There's nothing we can do about it. It is what it is. But, I do miss having, Auction OS and pointing to it to what other developers and what other manufacturers should actually do. So at the end of the day, that's kind of where we're at with that. In terms of the actual hardware inside, the OnePlus 8 Pro had that Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 chipset inside of it with 8 gigs of RAM on the base model, but it did go up to 12 gigabytes of RAM. Now, personally for me, with this type of device, I think the performance of it was pretty decent. I think at that moment, it had the best chipset of that year. So, I feel like Qualcomm knocks it out of the park most of the time. And this was no exception. This was a pretty good performing phone. And I do like the way they did give us the ability of going up to 12 gigabytes of RAM if we wanted it. Again, that would have been a little bit more expensive. But the thing I didn't like, they should have probably given us one more storage variant above the 256 gigabyte model. I feel like that's how Google was doing it for a while too. And they should be giving us they should be giving us at least like a 512 or something like that above it, But regardless, I will still say the performance of this phone is still pretty decent. It is, depending on which version of software you keep it on, if you keep it on Auction OS like 11 or 12, if you keep it on Auction OS like 11, maybe 12, maybe you'll have a better experience. But like I said, when I picked up this phone the first day, it was a very smooth experience. It was very fast. But I will say with the upgrades and with the updates, it's definitely bogged down the system a little bit more, and that would probably give it a little bit of a weirder experience overall to probably a majority of people. And it's crazy when you think about it, because nowadays, maybe a phone like a Galaxy S23 is smoother than something like the OnePlus phone, which I never thought I would even hear myself saying, but I think that's actually probably going to end up being the case. So, ending it off with the battery life, this thing did have a 4,510 mAh battery, which is a pretty big size battery to have on a device like this. So, again, reverse wireless charging is really nice. Although it's pretty slow, you still have that capability, which is really cool. So, to kind of sum up this video, what I'll tell you is, I think the OnePlus 8 Pro was a very, very good phone that OnePlus made during that moment. Of course, it had its fair share of issues and whatnot, but I do think when I take a look at this phone again, I think OnePlus did a good job. I just think they did not do a good job with its software, later on in its life. And I feel like that's where they probably dropped the ball in the furthest. I feel like they should have just focused in, brought in a, amazing version of software on their pretty decent hardware. And that can really keep people, floating for a long period of time. I feel like the OnePlus 7 Pro, they did a pretty good job. I feel like the OnePlus 7T, they did a good job on that phone too, which was so random. I remember that phone. But with this one, there's not really too much to remember. I mean, it was a great phone, but since then we've had a lot of great phones too. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.